Hi there, my name is Aisha Nurdin and I'd like to talk about the Generative Lexicon framework by James Pustejovsky. The objective of this video is to illustrate how the Generative Lexicon was developed to address the issue of understanding or misunderstanding meaning in lexical semantics. Just to give a little bit of backstory and background, this theory was developed by James Pustejovsky. He's an American computer scientist and is currently a professor at Brandeis University in Massachusetts. He specializes in computational modeling of language, particularly lexical semantics, among others. The generative lexicon theory stemmed from his 1991 article called The Generative Lexicon and has been developed since then. Now, let's get into what this all means. So, the generative lexicon combines the world of language with mathematics, and it focuses on the compositionality in natural language. This compositionality in this context is the principle that the meaning of a syntactically complex whole is a function only of the meanings of its syntactic parts together with the manner in which these parts were combined. To put it simply, Pustejovsky believes that lexical meaning is best accounted for by using rules of combination and inference, as opposed to the traditional approach of lexicography of listing senses of a lexeme. The generative lexicon breaks down sentences into clear structures in order to encode selectional knowledge in natural language. According to Pustejovsky in 2002, there are two philosophies of the generative lexicon, which are, number one, how are we able to utilize a finite number of words in our language in what seems like an infinite number of contexts? And number two, can we separate our common knowledge from lexical information and the representations used to compose meaning? Now, part of the reason Pustejovsky developed this theory was to address the issue of ambiguity. Some sentences seem to convey a new meaning when verbs are added to it. For example, Jason walked yesterday versus Jason walked to school yesterday. These verbs are ambiguous in their representations, as walked in the first sentence refers to a type of movement, whereas in the second sentence, walked refers to walking as a means for moving from one place to another. To understand the theory better, Pustejovsky further broke down the generative lexicon into 4 levels of representation. Number 1, the argument structure, which is specifying the number and nature of the arguments to a predicate and links the rules to syntax. Number 2, the event structure, which is defining the event type and any sub-eventual structure it may have, can also be broken down to further state, process, and transition. Number 3, the Qualia structure, a structural differentiation of the predicative force for a lexical item, or the essential tributes to classify the properties of a lexical item, which can also be further broken down to formal, constitutive, telic, and agentive. And lastly, the inheritance structure, which is how the word is related to other concepts in the network of the lexicon. For the first one, argument structure. Associated with verbs, the argument structure allows for the conversion of a conventional mapping from a word to a function. One view of this structure is that it is highly structured, independent of the syntax, according to Grimshaw in 1992. Second, the inheritance structure. This structure determines how a word is related to other words in a network or a structured system. On top of that, it also captures how the concepts or meanings are integrated into an expression in a sentence. So basically, it organizes words by the lexical knowledge as well as the general common knowledge. The main focuses of generative lexicon, though, are the event structure and the Qualia structure. For the event structure, it identifies the event type for a verb or even a phrase. It's broken down into 3 types. Number 1, state. It's a single event evaluated on its own and is not related to any other event. So these events can stand on their own. For example, the verbs believe, hate, and be short. Number 2 is the process, which is a sequence of events identifying the same semantic expression. For example, shout, pull, run, all indicate that there is something for you to shout about, something to pull, or something to run towards. And number 3, the transition. It's an event identifying a semantic expression and is evaluated relative to its opposition. For example, give and receive, build and destroy. These verb class distinctions are characterized in a term called LCS apostrophe. LCS is a lexical semantic representation that takes the form of a predicate decomposition. The 3 structures shown previously represent the information that has been divided according to the different event structures. For example, consider the sentence, "The door is closed." This can be seen as a state, as the event structure can stand on its own. Now consider these two sentences instead. The door closed and John closed the door. These two structures demonstrate the shift in the LCS representations of the verb close within the sub-event. It is both inchoative, which means it happened on its own, as well as causative, which means something made it happen. So in this case, John is the one that caused the door to close. Next up, we have adverbial modification. Pustejovsky proposes that there are two kinds of adverbs, wide scope and narrow scope. The ambiguity of certain adverbs can be explained by different scope assignments of said verbs. For example, the sentence Ryan lovingly serenaded Liz can be interpreted in two ways. The first is Ryan serenaded Liz in a loving way, and the second way is it was a loving thing to do for Ryan to serenade Liz. The ambiguity of this sentence happens because there are both a manner and a stative interpretation. By using LCS representation, the ambiguity can be clearly represented with the adverbial modification of the same lexical item. Finally, we have the Qualia structure, which is regarded as the most descriptive component of the generative lexicon. The term qualia, or quail, which is the singular form of qualia, refers to the Latin meaning of what kind of thing and aims to identify an aspect of a word's meaning according to Zodiac and Pustejovsky. For example, our common knowledge that burgers are created through cooking is considered a quail of the word burger. Inspired by Aristotle's theory of explanation and Moravcik's ideas on aisha, or the cause, Pustejovsky proposed a system of relations to help characterize the semantics of nominals. The Qualia structure of a noun defines its meaning, which is just as important as the list of arguments that determine a verb's meaning. Just listing senses in a dictionary is not sufficient enough to account for polysemy, as there are different variations with multiple senses. For example, the word thick can have multiple senses according to the context. The newspaper is quite thick, which is bulky. That girl looks quite thick in her new jeans, which is shapely. He's a bit thick, isn't he? Which is stupid. And the air was pretty thick today, which is dense. Therefore, one would have to really rely on the linguistic information to make an inference. So in a sense, the Qualia structure refers to the classification of properties of an item. Now this structure has four rules. The first rule is the constitutive rule, which is the relation between an object and its constituents or proper parts, or what an object is made of. Number two is the formal rule, which is the category to distinguish the meaning of a word within a larger domain, which is made up of orientation, magnitude, shape, dimensionality, color, and position. Number three is the telic rule. This is to define the purpose and function of the object. It deals with the built-in function or aim that is specific to certain activities. And lastly, we have the agentive rule. These are the factors involved in the origin of the object, like the creator, artifact, natural kind, and causal chain. A qualia is then seen as made up of these four rules as shown by this illustration. For example, the word house. So you can see the different rules in the word house itself. By using the qualia structure, we can begin to pick apart a sentence and understand it better when we come across a polysemy. For example, Susie cooked the broccoli and Rachel cooked a burrito. The word cooked here has two different senses and is a polysemy. When Susie cooked the broccoli, she changed the state of the broccoli, but it was still a broccoli throughout the whole event. However, when Rachel cooked a burrito, she created something new out of its parts, which is the ground beef, spices, oil, sour cream, and etc. So, in conclusion, Pustejovsky believes that lexicons should be seen as a generative system, as opposed to it being fixed and rigid. The flexibility of the generative lexicon allows us to eliminate ambiguity by sort of spreading the semantic load more to other categories. Now, I'd like to ask a couple of questions. The first question is, the Qualia structure's rules can seem a bit confusing. So how can we really remember their rules better? It's simple, really. So just think of it this way. The constitutive rule is the part of relation. The formal rule is a relation. The telic rule is the used for relation, and the agentive rule is the created by relation. So by using this, you can say, for example, Italic role is this thing is used for something else, and this agentive role, this thing is created by something else. So that's how it can be an easier way to remember. The second question, referring to the event structure, how does the LCS representation of a verb change from process to transition? Although it might seem a bit complicated, the only important change is the addition of a causative factor, or an agent of sorts, something to cause the verb to happen. Because of this, the LCS representation will differ significantly as the representation explicitly refers to a causative factor or a causal agent. Therefore, while some verbs can still be ambiguous on a semantic level, there is still the logical relatedness that can be identified in the LCS representation. And that is all for my video today. Thank you!